get a contractor, or if we go to Canada and they have the better assets, we'll go that route. Mexico has provided a lot of assistance on how they respond to humanitarian assistance events for training in our personnel as well. So it's a mutual exchange. Next slide, please. We will continue to synchronize our military efforts and strengthen the already well-established military-to-military relationship we have with Mexico. As professional militaries, we understand the challenges that Mexico faces and will continue to partner with them as we both face future challenges. As you can see, I too chose a quote from Mr. Winston Churchill there. It's a very relevant quote from my commander. He believes very strongly that the only way we can survive in this area and survive with engaging the DTOs and the TCOs is to partner very closely with Canada Command and Mexico to provide continental security, as we briefed earlier. That's my brief. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate the opportunity to provide U.S. Northern Command's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Ramirez. And now we'll go on with General Ospina.
There we go. I was saying the most important part of the presentation, that it's a big honor for me to be here today and to focus on this subject. It's my favorite subject, so sometimes I get too boring. So I ask for your comprehension during the next following 20 minutes. I'm going to focus on the process. And the process we undertook in year 2003, because during those years, we settled down the foundation for the future strategies that had been developed or used during these years in Colombia. Even I'm going to use some slides we have been using for years here at NDU, at the center, and in other places. But of course, during the Q&A period, I will be happy to answer your questions. Next one. To develop our capacity, of course, we had a political initial framework. As you can see in the slide, it wasn't that good, especially because it was very low popular support for the government, and there was a sensation of no legitimacy of our government in those days. Remember, I'm talking about 2003, and that was caused because a general lack of security and very poor results by the armed forces and the CNP, Colombian National Police. So that was our initial framework, very, very low popular support for the government policies during those years. And of course, no legitimacy. I think that's the key word when you talk about building capacities. Next one, please. In that year, 2003, we got President Uribe and his democratic security policy, what now we call the Uribe theory, Uribe's theory, and it's based in some particular points. First of all, the establishment of a political center of gravity. There's some confusion, and it's because normally they understand the center of gravity at the strategic level. With Uribe, we understood that the center of gravity is at the political level. Because So we decided to change the level of the center of gravity. And I'll talk about that later on. And of course, to build capacities, we need to provide guidance through political lines of action. And with that on mind, to analyze the priority on the programs. And of course, it was necessary that all these programs were sustainable. I'm going to talk about those political concepts in a very brief way. First of all, the center of gravity. For me, that was the most important of the innovations we undertook with President Uribe. Because we shift from a center of gravity based on in a physical concept, to a center of gravity based on cohesion. That's a center of gravity based on a political relation between the government and the people. So if you want to build capacities, first you want to know how is your relation with the people. If the people has an important level of acceptance of the government, that's legitimacy, and you have a center of gravity. If not, you don't have, and you don't have a center of gravity, and you can build thousands of capacities. They will be useless. If you see, I'm sorry, next one, please. Yeah, I was talking exactly about this. You see two graphics. Number one is traditionally, in cases like Colombia, they have always tried to isolate the people from the insurgents. You see the P and the I, and to cut down that support. So they consider that the center of gravity is the support that people provides to the insurgent. So the main action is always to try to isolate. If you understand it in this way, you will build your capacities in a different way. As we understood it, we understood the center of gravity on those years, as I told you before, we saw that what we need was legitimacy, acceptance from the people. So we changed the relation from people to insurgents to government and people. You can see G and P. So that legitimacy would become the center of gravity, that correct relation between the people and the government. And the main action was not to try to isolate people from the insurgent, was to protect people from the insurgent. So our capacities were built with this in mind, to protect people and not to isolate people. Remember, we are in Colombia. We are not in a foreign country. We are in Colombia. And that makes a world of difference when your insurgency is being developed. Your counterinsurgency is being developed in a foreign country. When you are in your country, in your own country, you have to think, especially in this relationship, if you want to build the correct capacities. I think we did it to a point, but I think we did it. We built the correct capacities. Next one, please. I was talking about the necessity of political guidance. So the government developed these four political lines of action. In my view, the most important was number one on top. Next one, please. Okay, that's it. Because that was how we interacted with our ally, the United States of America. And I have to confess that during those difficult years, in spite of a lot of difficulties, our only ally was the United States of America. In some way, we were isolated from the other countries. They just keep blaming Colombia for so many problems. But as I see it, you see, the relationship was based in four main points: political role, not at a strategic level, technical and tactical oriented, military culture. What does it mean? I came here a couple of times to talk to Mr. Rumsfeld, and he always asked me, how do you see the American support for Colombia? And my answer was always this one. First of all, the political role, the American political role is the most important part of our partnership, of our alliance, because with this support, we will never be isolated. So, to build capacities, you have to begin understanding the political role, and the political role to support, in a political way, a country like Colombia is the most important part. And in my priorities, next one was, last one, a transfer of military culture. More than technical and tactical oriented programs, the transfer of military culture is very important. You will find people in armies, like the Colombian army, that will never travel abroad, will never know something different from the knowledge he gets from his commanders. But if you see people coming from other culture, you will learn a lot. So my two priorities, to build capacities from this viewpoint, as I told you, political role and military culture, never to be isolated, and learn from the example and the behavior of a military personnel coming from another culture. At the beginning, we didn't have capacities at the strategic level. I mean, we didn't get capacities at the strategic level because, remember, we are talking about 2002 and 2003. In those years, counterinsurgency was not a priority here. Iraq and Afghanistan were still not the issues they are today. They were just beginning. So we consider that the American leadership was not familiarized with counterinsurgency. So we discarded this type of capacity, and we went to technical and tactical oriented support to build capacities on that level. And the other three lines of political lines of action. Of course, security was prioritized, having the idea that security had to be equal for everyone in Colombia and had to be a very transparent procedure. So security for everyone. So in the military, capacities were developed to security, and all of that was oriented to trust from the population. So I'm not talking about firepower, I'm not talking about helicopters, I'm not talking about planes, I'm not talking about ammunition, I'm talking about trust, because that's the center of the political procedures of the political way of running a country in the situation we were is trust. So we were oriented to trust. And next one, and we developed a strategic model. Next one, please. You see, with roles for the military, government, and people. And if you see under military on your left, you'll see that we were oriented to trust, and we were trying to get or to improve our capacities to participate in tactical actions, operations, campaigns, area control, and security in general. But the aim was trust. Of course, next one, please. Of course, we needed support. And we got some support. This is a chart. Oh, next one, please. Oh, okay, there you go. The slides, let's say the red slides, is the percentage of support that we got from America related to the to the defense budget. So you see, in 2004, it was 15% of the budget came from here, and in 2005, 17% of the defense budget. So it was sustainable. But of course, in average, from 2003 to 2010, it has been 7%. So building capacities, but with sustainability. And next one, please. Well, I apologize, it's in Spanish. I just got that slide yesterday. I didn't have time, so I apologize. But it means, next one, it means this. There was a special task asked for President Uribe for security purposes, and it was paid by the wealthiest, let's say, people of Colombia. In fact, not people, industry and that kind of stuff. And in an average has been the 6% of the defense budget. So the defense budget has been increased by the support of the American people and by the support of the Colombian people. So this was enough. Well, it's never enough, but let's say the minimum to develop our capabilities. And we decided to develop our capabilities with three main purposes. Next one, please. First, protect population and its resources. Remember, we talk about the center of gravity and to protect people. So that's why our capabilities were first directed to protect population, and we developed special programs coming from that budget to protect population, protect people and resources. In the second place, to develop capabilities to neutralize and weaken illegal armed structures. That's FARC groups, bands in the countryside. And in the third place, to rescue hostages and capture or kill enemy leadership. So we decided to develop these three types of capacities. And if you follow the situation in Colombia, you will see that they have emphasized number 3, rescue hostages and capture enemy leadership. But you see, when we developed these capacities, this one was just a support for first one, because our priority was to protect citizens. But of course, this one, as we thought in 2002, will provide sustainability. Everybody will be very happy, but it won't end the war. In my view, I think there has been I would say, a change of priorities, and because, of course, capacity built with the assistance of American teams, especially here. We organize two special units, Commando Battalion and Lancero Unit, and a special joint command with the assistance of special forces coming from here. And we have been very successful, and we are very proud of our special forces, but it won't end the war. So this was the process, how we developed our capacities, and these were the three main capacities that we developed, and I think have been the foundation for all the success we have had. With that, I will close, but I will be open for questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And before we open it up for questions, let me just recap very quickly. I think some of the highlights here are very complementary within these three presentations. As Jay has mentioned, there's a new era. The U.S. was used to this mindset where only the United States had the capability to be able to help in the region and the responsibility, whereas things are changing dramatically in the region. He also, where the need to change what we're doing, he challenged the idea of the approach that the U.S. has in terms of broadening that, and used actually Colombia's model as to show that it's not enough to do those three pillars. He was looking at broadening this beyond our approach to do the kinds of things that President Uribe showed and the kinds of things that Carlos was just raising, as well as this sort of multinational approach to capacity building. Commander Ramirez talked a lot about not only the specific case of how we are in fact approaching Mexico in this capacity building relationship, not just in a military to military relationship, but how the military is also supporting the interagency efforts. And I think Carlos's presentation showed the quite dramatic difference, how it really was needed for Colombia to take on its role and think through its unique situation to see what the center of gravities truly were, and to design a program beyond just the U.S. assistance, that its own focus to address the problems and the success they had as a result. With the time we have, if we can take maybe 2 or 3 questions at a time. There's one right here. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Major Ed Larumbe, and I am from WINSEC. And I'm happy to report that not only that Major Acosta did a very good job as a student through the Command and Staff course, El Curso de Estado Mayor, but we also had a Costa Rican police and 2 police members of Panama. So excellent job by them. Mi general, señor, me reporto. I would like to know how did you integrate it into what we call the JIM concept, the Joint Interagency, Intergovernmental, and Multinational Operations, the jungle police, the jungle welfare police, and in building their capacities to secure and assisting the military in securing the population, as well as bringing in the NGOs and other governmental agencies that would assist you for those control measures? And what were your measures of effectiveness in those operations? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alejandra Bolaños, I'm a faculty member here at NDU. Commander Ramirez, I guess this question is directed to you, but I would also like to hear it from other members of the panel in case they have ideas. Let me share a very brief concern, and then this situates the question. I'm concerned about the budgetary environment in the United States and the willingness of Congress and other people that approve monies to actually continue with that political support that General Ospina so eloquently said is so important for us to continue building capacity. And in that sense, Commander, I am wondering if we are building in mechanisms of our help to our Mexican counterparts in which either they or us can precisely measure effects-based things, as opposed to we count for so many people trained or so many programs developed, but that we're actually having effects at the strategic level tied to the strategic objectives of the Merida Initiative, and effects like the ones that General Ospina talked about, that eventually do lead to winning wars, as opposed to just spending money.
The integration of the CMP, the Colombian National Police, with the armed forces, I would say it has been a very smooth process because in Colombia, according to our government structure, the CMP reports to the defense minister. So it's not it's a civilian police, but reporting to the defense minister. And of course, armed forces also report to the defense minister. So the integration, it's let's say at that level, let's say at the political level, it's easy. Because CMP, the director, has to report to the defense minister. So in the political level, it's everybody understands. And by the way, you can see the type of civil control over the armed forces of the police in Colombia. We call it, it's a very, I would say it's an objective type of control. I wouldn't call it a subjective, but an objective type of control. Sometimes there are some problems at the tactical and operative level. Basically at the tactical level, because the CMP has participated as part of the special operations. But all those problems have been overcome, and I would say it has been very easy because of the way the chain of command has been established. That's for the special operations, one of the main capabilities or capacities that we have in special forces. For the terrain, area control, let's say those officers, police officers that are detached in small places with the mission to protect the village. Sometimes there is some, at the beginning there was some problem to support those guys because we didn't have enough helicopters, because at that level the chain of command wasn't so clear. But with time they have integrated, and today they have in a regional, they call task force commands where they have integrated the CMP. So the chain of command now runs from the defense minister to the last police officer and soldier in a very smooth way, because they have those combined or coordinated commands. So I think it's one of the strengths that we have in this struggle against the FARC.
As for the first question, since those are pretty closely tied together, for the budget issues, it's one of the main concerns that we have for U.S. Northern Command, and the impact is going to be to provide the support that we have for Mexico. What we have established for the last couple of years is a cooperative defense synchronization workshop where we meet annually, spend a couple of days with SAMAR, a couple of days with SEDENA, to discuss their priorities for the next 2 or 3 years. In that meeting, we have all of our components, the Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force components that are there also, so they can discuss what they need to do for the next couple of years for the training and exercises events. When we finish that, we put together a training plan to look for the next 5 years, and we try and parse all these out for those 5 years. We also get back with Mexico a couple of months later to prioritize what we think they should have and then what they think they should have and in what order. So hopefully each year we are giving them, they are giving us, we are coordinating what events will occur based on the mutual discussions that we have. So far, the last couple of years has worked out fairly well. Next year will be a little more interesting as the budget hits a little bit harder. But we have the events planned out for next year. It'll be the following year that's going to be a little more interesting. We've already had these discussions with the Mexican military, so they're going to start reprioritizing their events so they know they get their first 2 or 3 things, either coming to WINSEC, going to training events, getting simulator training for their pilots, any of those types of events they want to do. We'll get those prioritized ahead of purchasing things if purchasing is not going to be the priority for the next year or so. For measure of effectiveness is another item that our J8 is working on to figure out how we properly measure that. One of the items we're having issues with is trying to bend a lot of our actions in a Department of State lexicon makes it difficult to compare a DOD measure of effectiveness with a DOS measure of effectiveness. Thankfully, our political advisor at Northern Command is very astute at doing that, and he provides a lot of guidance to a lot of us to figure out how to frame what we claim as a DOD measure of effectiveness, how that can translate over to a State Department measure of effectiveness. A lot of those are constant discussions that my commander has with the political advisor, and he has those discussions with those of us that are working security cooperation quite frequently so that we are in the same situation and measure of effectiveness at. We're also working very closely with our public affairs to talk with Mexico and their government to see how they want to measure it as well. So when we put an article out in the newspaper, it matches what they want to be said and vice versa. So there's no confusion on who says what's good and not. That's the best answer I can give you for right now.
Thank you. Other questions? It's right here.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. For General Ospina.
If you could also give your name and
I'm
organization.
Sorry, I'm Robin Baldwin. I'm the Air Attaché in El Salvador. On the last question, you touched on an important point regarding the military working with the police. I think, at least in El Salvador, and we've been talking about in this forum about the militaries providing public security. In El Salvador, we have a situation where the military is under the MOD and the police are under the Minister of Public Security. And because of the Civil War, there's all kinds of fears about militarizing public security, which we may be seeing in other countries in Central America. I'm not sure about that. So with these countries, I think a lot of them are looking to Colombia as a model of success. But you mentioned that having the strength of having the police and the military under the same Minister of Defense. So I guess in your opinion, for the challenges that we're facing in Central America now, where those two entities are distinctly separate with a lot of trust issues in between the two of them, in your experience, how would you see them going forward? Or what would you see as a possible success for them?
Thank you. Frederick?
I'm not sure if this is a comment wrapped in some questions or some questions wrapped in a comment. But my questions and comments are actually towards Jay and towards Commander Ramirez. On the latter, I imagine that when NORTHCOM or SOUTHCOM or any U.S. DoD entity is looking at working with foreign military financing and foreign military sales, theater security cooperation, the resources you use are likely limited, for example, when you do equipment, to buying services and equipment and technology from United States providers in order to take down to a country to help them build their capacity. And so part of my question there is, do you have any flexibility in looking at the technologies and products available in the region so that you can buttress their own capacity building or their own capacity generating capability? I worked for many years identifying those sorts of things for the U.S. government and now for the private sector. And as a quick list, you have countries producing top-notch Class 1 and 2 UAVs. Argentina is one. You have people developing advanced surveillance equipment. Brazil is an example. You have people developing explosives and drug detection equipment. Argentina again. You have people developing software and algorithms for operating even multi-UAV, rotary wing UAV, swarming operations. Colombia is an example. You have people building anti-ballistic systems that include RPG defeat capabilities, Uruguay. My point is that you have a tremendous amount of technological development in the region, and we tend to give them something from the United States. Is there any ability to help in the capacity building to buttress their own capacity generating capability? And part of that, and this goes towards Jay,
Frederick, I think we got it. Okay.
well, it was a whole of government approach. We've heard whole of government. What ideas are there for interagency international coordination within the U.S. government? Because we have people all over the place down there touching many aspects of society that the General pointed out to, but our efforts are not coordinated.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more question? Yes, over here, please. Thanks, Frederick.
Major Pinto, U.S. Army South. This is for General Ospina. I just got a question regarding, you spoke about the phases for defeating the FARC. I noticed that there's a great deal of displacement of civilian population right now in Colombia. I was just wondering, is there an additional phase to address that problem? And also the introduction of FARC that have been reintroduced back into society. What has been initialized to address the displacement of those civilians and the FARC that were disarmed and brought back into the civil population?
Thank you. Let's start Carlos and then Jay, Carly. Thank you.
Well, I think in Central America, there's a security issue, and I think it's getting worse and worse. Even the presidents have asked for the legalization of drugs as a consequence of the security issue. So, as I see it, in my view, the coordination between the armed forces and the police should be strengthened and should be done through a particular structure that would, like in our case, coordinate both of them. So I think that police should come closer to the defense ministry, because you also mentioned a word about securitization. And I agree. If we go to Stockholm and they talk about the securitization of the defense and that kind of stuff, it makes sense. But if you go to the streets where people, they don't care who's a soldier and who's a police or a police officer, they just want to have security. And that's the reason of being of the state. So as I see it, the state has to understand that the common good is security. So there must be an integrated command structure so the police and the armed forces could act protecting people. Remember that armed forces in Central America, after the wars, became under strength. I think the average is between 15 and 17,000. So they are not very many. So they have, as I understand it, it should be used to protect people. As we did, our first priority was to protect people and property. I think that should be the way forward in Central America.
I specifically tried to de-link talking about working with countries on capacity building from the equipment side. The equipment side is really based on relationships that the host government has with different countries to provide materiel. The United States is notorious for not having inexpensive materiel. We have good programs, but they are not inexpensive. So, and we're also precluded from using U.S. money to purchase foreign equipment for countries. Now, there may be some exceptions to that I'm not aware of, but by and large, I think the law precludes it's buy American. So I think countries like Honduras have already recognized that if they're going to get something to help their Air Force, for example, they need to go to Brazil. And Brazil is very seriously engaged in perhaps trying to provide them with aircraft. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how the funding works for the Mexican pilots and mechanics that go to Colombia and work in the Colombian, or are trained at Colombian bases on flying aircraft and working on them. I'm not sure if we're paying for that or whether Mexico is. Mexico is? Okay, Mexico is. So that's a good example of if you're going to go outside the U.S. system, you've got to pay for it yourself. I think that's basically the bottom line that you learned, which makes it a little bit more difficult to collaborate together.
Just to reaffirm that, with the U.S., we don't endorse, U.S. Northern Command does not endorse going to Brazil or going to any other country for using their military equipment. There are several engagements that we have with Mexico, and during these synchronization workshops, if they express a desire for a technology, UAVs were what was mentioned, we first try and figure out if that's what they want or what is the capacity they want to build, and see if UAVs will be able to support that. If it turns out that is what they want and they choose to go to Brazil for UAVs, then they go to Brazil. As was mentioned, they are a sovereign country, so they frequently go to other countries to pick up equipment from Brazil, from Argentina, from Colombia for training and other events of that nature. What we try and do is, when they are doing events of that nature, when we have these workshops, if they let us know they're already doing training over there, then we can cut back and shift events around to support them based on their priorities. So if we had planned on doing the training of that nature and they're already going to Mexico for it, then we'll shift that around to do something else. And then we'll ask, as we're working with other countries, how we can mutually do this. Canada Command has helped us out when we have these synchronization workshops. They'll go down and they'll listen and see where they can add in, or where they desire to add events in there for training. They have a robust training plan going down for legal and rule of law in those events. So perhaps we can leverage that and do one or two less events from the U.S. side and provide one or two more events for in the classroom side to help out with Mexico. So we try and get everybody together to work those out. We don't influence them in any way what they want to choose. So for foreign military sales and foreign military financing, that's just a pot of money and avenue in which they choose to go and to acquire the equipment they want. Northcom has no say in how that works. As far as coordination is concerned, we do have an interagency coordination group that is assigned to U.S. Northern Command. We have liaison officer representatives from many, many agencies in the D.C. arena. And we try to coordinate very closely from the security cooperation side. Coordinate in the sense that I try and figure out what they're doing, because they have a different timeline and pace in which they work than what we do. So there are several times that they're doing events in Mexico working with State Department that we may not be aware of for DOD. So we try and figure out where they're doing those events to either leverage that and help us out, particularly with the budgeting going down and the impact that's going to have on us, but also for visibility. So we know that somebody in the State Department is doing some work in this area, so maybe we don't need to. And we also talk about those events. If something comes up, we can say, State Department is doing this, or DOD is doing this in this particular area, and we can leverage that as positive venues for engagement that we have in partnering with Mexico.
I don't think we got to answer your question, but unfortunately, we are out of time. I hope that this panel and the discussion, not only the presentations, but the discussion afterwards, has stimulated your thinking about how we should be doing capacity building, the way we should do it, and we do it together. I mean, I hope stimulate your thinking as has mine. This is a really interesting area, and it's, and Carlos didn't get into it, but Colombia, with its capacity, is now involved in Mexico, involved in Guatemala. We just happen to have, the Canadians happen to be, General Thibault, Admiral Greenwood are here, Help Claypuck from Canada in the front row, along with our U.S. folks, arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, we're working together in many countries. And I think this, as Jay has mentioned, this is really the way of the future. We clearly cannot, we know we can't do this alone. No country can, but I think it behooves us to think how we can do better and use these tremendous capacities that already exist, not just in our country, but in all of these other countries around the region. So would you please join me in thanking all of our panelists for a very interesting discussion. And with that, I think I pass back Jay from his panelist role to organizer role here.
Yeah, I got to put the organizer hat back on. To ensure that we have a smooth transition to lunch, we have invited General Thibault to speak here. So let's take about a 10-minute break. The cowbell will get going, and we will have his remarks, and then we'll go to lunch.